I still like playing with toys that make me feel super strong and powerful, whenever I put on my training gear and grab a hold of like a barbell or a stone or something, I feel like He-Man all over again. But there's a big problem. Whenever I tried to put on muscle mass, I'd get too fat, and when it was time to drop fat and get lean again, I would lose all my hard-earned strength and muscles and just become skinny and weak from doing hours of boring cardio and basically starving myself. Have you ever heard of bulking and cutting? Well, that's exactly how I've typically gone about gaining muscle and building mass, and I would spend several months building mass, all the while getting fat too. And then there was a right time when I'd go ahead and try to lose fat, and at the same time I'd end up losing a lot of the hard-earned muscle that I had built. If you've ever been exposed to the most popular muscle building systems available today, you've no doubt read about and perhaps even experimented with bulking and cutting, such as I have. Now, I don't know about you, but this system seems very slow and ineffective. Also, it's pretty embarrassing to carry around all that extra fat when bulking, having to explain that you're just trying to build some muscle. And in my opinion, there's nothing worse than losing all that muscle and ending up puny and weak all over again. I mean, what's the whole point of this anyway? Well, I would typically ask myself another question. What's the big deal? Why can't I just be happy being either really strong, muscular, and perhaps a little plump, or really lean, but perhaps a little skinny and weak and puny? Well, if you ask mythologist Joseph Campbell, he would argue that you need to be superhero-like. It's embedded in our DNA. So why would I want to have a superhero physique? The short answer is that it would be a physical representation of a psychological ideal, really of becoming fully self-actualized, basically becoming the best that you can be. And with regard to all virtues, the one that is immediately visible to all who cross your path is that of your physique. Other virtues which are of great significance are often hidden from the public eye until a challenge brings it forth. For example, if the virtue of honesty, we're discussing that, then it's only typically displayed when exercised in a situation where one is challenged with choosing a dishonest act. The virtue of vigorous health, though, strength, vitality, and just a good health, is constantly on display. All you need to do is take a walk along the beach on a hot summer day, and you will immediately be able to point out the virtuous, i.e. fit, lean, and strong, and the unvirtuous, fat, puny, weak, and slovenly. Well, if you're like most of us mortals, it's pretty simple. You've got to burn fat and build muscle if you want to build a superhero physique. But like I mentioned, the typical bulking and cutting systems that take way too long, and a lot of guys end up just bulking up and never actually getting around to cutting, and that's basically how I got fat. So this led me to ask the question, is it really possible to burn fat and build muscle at the same time, therefore getting us to reach that goal of a lean, muscular, and strong physique in the minimal amount of time? Well, W. Clement Stone once said that whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. And it's usually the people that are willing to defy convention that gain extraordinary results. Well, typically as I do, I'll take that statement one step further and say that if you're inspired by the idea of a bigger, leaner, more muscular self, or of any ideal self-image, and you don't take action towards it, you're a derelict in your duty not only to yourself, but to the rest of mankind as well. You know, just imagine if He-Man decided that it was just way too much work to train with heavy weights and do his conditioning 4 times a week. Skeletor would be running wild, stealing souls left and right, and She-Ra, she may have hooked up with a Ninja Turtle or something like that. That would be a mess. Bottom line is, you need to become a superhero. Basically, live a fully self-actualized life. So, if we're going to go ahead and end up being a superhero, we've got to ask ourselves, well, what type of training does a superhero do? So let's explore the type of training that He-Man must have done. Now, I know that He-Man is a cartoon, but humor me for a moment, please. First, we know that he is strong Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to swing around that 40-pound sword that he carries or have the ability to toss bad guys off of cliffs. So he must have done some sort of strength building or powerlifting training. Next, just look at him, and it's obvious to see that he's done some type of muscle building or bodybuilding work. This is the type of training that's used by bodybuilders to build up lots of hard slabs of muscle on their chest and arms. Also, in order to keep his body fat low, you just look at the cartoon to the right. It's so low that you can see every striation in his abs, in his shoulders, and his legs. And he must have done some sort of cardio or conditioning or aerobic work in order to achieve and maintain that. So besides burning fat, this type of training I'm sure he used in order to keep his stamina up when fighting off bad guys. Finally, I'm pretty sure that he would have used some sort of functional or strongman type training in order to build and maintain his athleticism. Bodybuilding and cardio are good for sculpting, sculpting your physique, but sucky. They're absolutely terrible for building that functional strength that most guys desire. We don't want to just look like we're in shape. We want to feel like we're in shape too. So let's consider that He-Man was using all 4 of these types of training in order to build muscle and burn fat. Well, for the sake of argument, let's just call this type of training hybrid muscle training. Let's talk about each one of those components that He-Man must have been using and some of the pros and cons of each of them. Now, the first is strength building. This is where we lift heavy weights in order to get really strong. Powerlifters are so good at this that many times there's some of them that can lift like over 1,000 pounds. And I think that dude that you're looking at to the right there has pretty close to about 1,000 pounds in his hands. Probably around 800. And this is good for us too. We want to build strength because it's the foundation upon which we can build lots of lean muscle mass. The downside to this type of training is that some of its participants tend to be a little overweight due just to the lack of conditioning and overall training volume that we use. By itself, strength building is great, but it's not going to get us that lean hybrid muscle that we're looking for. Now, the next is bodybuilding, or the bodybuilding method. With bodybuilding, you assume that you had the perfect system since its participants typically have attractive physiques, like that guy on the right. But consider the following. Most bodybuilding routines are done on machines, which don't allow for free movement and the functional capacity that He-Man needs to wield that heavy sword around. Also, bodybuilders tend to build their muscles with very light weights, therefore many lack maximal strength. Well, besides, bodybuilders are the ones that popularize that bulking and cutting system that works so well, but worked for so many of us, but ended up making some of us just like overweight and fat, like it had done for me. And a system like that might really work well for someone who abuses steroids, but what if you just like to build an attractive natural physique? Alright, well, here's the deal with aerobics and so-called cardio conditioning. Yes, professional marathon runners and triathletes may be extremely lean, but most of them lack any real muscle mass and many look very weak and emaciated. Also, this type of repetitive training leads to pattern overload and tons of wear and tear on the joints. And although I haven't covered much of this yet, excessive aerobic conditioning also sets your body into a catabolic state, making it very hard for you to maintain higher levels of testosterone and therefore counterproductive to building muscles. Besides, cardio, in my opinion, is boring, to say the least. Now, here's a picture of me doing farmer's walks. I love strongman training, so I'm going to try my best to be completely objective about its pros and cons. Well, first, strongman training is great because it builds tons of athletic functional strength. Just what He-Man needs to fight in battles. Also, because it combines strength training with short stints of conditioning, it also means that it means for muscle building it's great, and so also for burning fat. Here's the downside. Many of the exercises are highly specialized and it may be difficult to get your hands on the equipment. Also, without the combined efforts of strength building and bodybuilding, it may be difficult to really get any real impact with strongman training by itself. Okay, so what is the secret to He-Man's super hybrid muscle? Well, before I divulge some of my research, I want to warn you. What I'm about to say, most typical personal trainers and exercise lab rats will tell you doesn't really work. But remember what W. Clement Stone said earlier. Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. And I truly believe in this model that I'm about to show you, even though it cannot be found in any textbook in some massive university library somewhere. You just won't find it. So through the resources that I'm going to share with you in just a moment, I've concluded that He-Man had constructed with all this lean muscle tissue with what I call type 3 muscle fibers. Now, before I click to the next page, be sure to pull out that pad and pen that I told you about earlier. And another warning. If you're not willing to open your mind and see the possibilities of what I'm about to show you, then just shut this video off right now. Okay, you ready? Let's talk about a few gentlemen who've explored what I'm about to talk about, and I'll tell you a little bit about them. Now, the old dude that you see over to the left, he's 70 years old, and he's lean and ripped. Apparently, obviously, you probably don't want to look like him, but remember, he's probably twice our age. He's the author and researcher. His name is Dr. Len Schwartz, and he experimented with a new type of exercise protocol that created what he called long strength. Now, among several other positive attributes, including the lean and jacked body that he walks around with as a senior citizen, Dr. Schwartz claimed that training with his long strength protocol would reconfigure the fiber composition of the working muscles. And over time, the muscle would morph and would acquire additional mitochondria, producing increased mitochondrial density. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what the heck is that? What's mitochondrial density? Well, we'll talk a bit about more what that means and why it's important in just a few moments. The next guy is bodybuilding consultant John Furillo, who was among the first to insist that bodybuilders begin doing high-intensity cardio. He insisted that this would alter the composition of the muscle again, and it would add more mitochondria to the working muscles. Furillo even took his idea for increasing mitochondrial density one step further and devised a resistance training program using 100-rep extended sets, specifically designed to do what? Construct more muscle mitochondria. Basically the same thing that Dr. Len Schwartz said earlier. We want to increase that mitochondrial density, and his system allowed that. The next guy, who I really like a lot, and I've been reading some of his stuff extensively, is Ahok McClure. And he's one of the first guys to use the term controlled fatigue training. And he insists that this type of hybrid muscle training constructs the super muscle, capable of generating sustained strength over long periods of time. And listen to this. Ahok McClure also stated that CFT, controlled fatigue training, would also, over time, reconfigure muscles by creating more mitochondria. Yep, increase mitochondrial density once again. So that's the third time that we've mentioned that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Ahok McClure was convinced that ancient warriors and earlier man had a predominance, or a lot of, these hybrid super muscles, and our ancestors needed to sustain strength and endurance for fighting, fleeing, and rowing massive boats for extended periods of time. Okay, so you're probably asking yourself, Elliot, what the heck is mitochondrial density? And what is it that you're explaining when you keep mentioning that? Well, first, let's take a little look at your muscle fibers really quickly. Generally speaking, you have two types of muscle fibers. You've got your type 1 and you got your type 2 muscle fibers. And each of your muscles, every one of your muscles are made up of some ratio of this type 1 or type 2 muscle fibers, depending on several factors. Now, type 1 fibers are slow twitch and are generally referred to as red fibers. They're also very narrow in diameter but have the capacity to fatigue slowly due to their oxidative capacity. Basically, they're good for doing long stints of exercise like cardio that many people use for fat burning. Also, type 1 fibers tend to have a higher concentration of mitochondrial density than type 2. Type 2 fibers are fast twitch and are often referred to as white fibers. They're thicker in diameter than type 1 fibers and have an explosive capacity, but they tend to fatigue much faster. Muscles like the glutes and rectus abdominis are primarily type 2 muscle fibers. Because of the thicker diameter of these fibers, many bodybuilders and powerlifters aim to stimulate these fibers to build maximal strength for muscle growth. Are you following me? Okay. Now the mitochondria are like these cellular power plants, so to speak, and I'm going to point to one right here. You'll see it, little orange thing. And they generate most of the cell's supply of ATP, so they supply energy to the muscle. And ATP is a source of chemical energy, like I mentioned. The number of mitochondria or power plants in a cell varies widely by organism and fiber type. And many type 1 muscle fibers contain millions of mitochondria, while some type 2 fibers may only have a single mitochondria. Now here's where it gets interesting. By combining resistance training such as muscle building and strength building with cardiovascular training in the same set, we force the thicker, stronger type 2 muscle fibers to begin to behave more like type 1 fibers. This is the essence of what sustained strength or hybrid muscle training is all about. And here's why this is so exciting to me. By constructing this mito-infused or type 2 or mito-infused type 2 or this type 3 muscle fiber with the type of training that we'll be talking about later, we're literally resetting the genetic limits of the muscle. It's incredible. With increased mitochondrial density, like we mentioned, more nutrients can be processed. And these type 3 muscle fibers have a greater capacity to grow larger, resist fatigue for a much longer period of time. So guess what that means? Okay, right. They're bigger, they're stronger, and they have better stamina. This type of training leads to more muscle and the ability to burn more fat. So like I said earlier, this may be our ticket to burning fat and building muscle at the same time, a concept that's highly debated amongst fitness professionals. So you're probably asking yourself, what are some examples of this hybrid training that you're talking about, Elliot? Well, you've got sustained strength workouts, and these have become more popular lately with the use of kettlebells. You've got resistance cardio workouts like sled dragging and parallel pushing, like you see my friend there doing to the right. And what I called max effort conditioning. This is basically, I'll give you the parameters at another time, but we can use heavy sandbag loading to do what I call max effort conditioning. So, of course, the parameters like reps, sets, and rest intervals that you use when training this way make all the difference in the world. And we're going to talk about this at great length at a later session. So, let's do a short recap. If you're still not sure why you should give up your treadmill treks and pec fly machines to use this form of hybrid muscle training, then listen closely. First, this is, in my experience, the only way to burn fat and build muscle at the same time. Second, this means that you'll get faster fitness results, and who here doesn't like the sound of that? Also, unlike many typical fat loss and fitness routines, with hybrid muscle training you're going to build muscle, burn fat, and through this process become more all-around athletic. That's because of the types of exercise that we choose when doing this program.